We're here to have a yarn. And, I just wanted to say welcome back to Newtown.
Thank you.
You were...
I like it here.
Yeah, she likes it here. She keeps coming back for
I
more,
do.
of course. But you were grown up here. You were born around here. And I imagine that as you walk through King Street and through Camperdown and through those other places that we all know so well, that the schemata of places changed somewhat. You're not that old, but things have changed.
Yeah, they have. In my early 40s, and growing up around here has been, it's a beautiful thing. Growing up in an urban environment is probably not what a lot of people consider traditional Aboriginal, background. But it doesn't make it any less a lived experience. So, my family had houses on Probert Street, Australia Street, and then we occupied 5 of the 7 Housing Commission houses that were next to Macca's on Parramatta Road at Stanmore, which my grandfather drove his Marrickville, we used to call it the Mickey Mouse Council, because it was MMC, but it's actually Marrickville Municipal Council. But for little kids, we were like, it's the Mickey Mouse Council. Drove his truck through the back fence so that all 5 of the dwellings could be one. And we used to have amazing firecracker nights. That's what I remember, like at 5 with cars parked down the end of the laneway and having, beautiful bonfires in the backyard. And yeah, it wasn't the bush, but it was certainly a really lovely family place. It felt safe. It was always safe.
I know that when I look through your book and when I read what you've written and when I talk to you outside of this particular work, that there's always these wonderful stories that come from you about this place and how things have changed and some of the characters of this place. And Uncle's reminded us the importance of storytelling so that we get a deeper understanding of what country is. So you've created this beautiful book, and one of the things that I just wanted to ask you is why? Why now? Because this is self-published, right? So this is a self-published book. So this is no insignificant commitment on your part. So if you could just share a little bit about the story of how this came into being, the birth.
Yeah. Look, it's a big undertaking to put a book together, regardless of what goes into the book. I think it's a huge undertaking, possibly one that I didn't quite realise was so big at the beginning, but one that I'm really grateful for in terms of the process. So for me, I was offered a publishing deal, and I actually I was quite pregnant with that opportunity, and then realised that actually I was just making up black space. And for me, it's been a very predetermined and very assertive use of my time, my brain and my resource to not just fill up black space, because that I have always wanted to articulate in an articulate fashion what it was that we stood for, not as Aboriginal people, but as Gadigal people. What were our stories? What was I wanting to say? What was the reason for this saying, and how would it be viewed? How would it be bought? How would you think about it when you took it home? And where I got to with that first opportunity was that it was just going to be cheap. It was going to look cheap and it was going to feel cheap and the experience was going to be cheap. And we're not cheap people. I'm quite over Aboriginal culture being seen as the plus something or the and. I'd like it to be this beautiful fabric of our gorgeous community for all of us to share, for us to all feel like we're part of this amazing fabric of culture, that we can go overseas and say, I'm Australian and I'm really proud of that. And I have to say, as somebody who travels a lot for art, I often don't feel very proud to be Australian. I often feel actually really embarrassed to be Australian. I'm very happy to be Koori, and I'm very happy to be Aboriginal, and I'm very happy to be a blackfella, but I don't know that I'm very happy to be an Australian. If I could change the passport picture on the front, I would. And that's just me. That's just how I was brought up. It's how my brain works. There's no point doing it unless you're going to do it in the right way. And so for me, I stopped the process, which was really hard financially, but also, morally, and it was time consuming to try and, step out of that process and then decide to self-publish, which, cost my husband and I a fortune. We, remortgaged our house to do it. That's how much we believed in it. So it's not a money-making venture, it's a money-losing venture. But I think to answer your question, there were a few good reasons. One, my art has been extremely well received, and it's something that I'm extraordinarily grateful for. I've had almost 10 years of a massively sustainable career, which a lot of artists do not have until they die, and I'm clearly not dead. So I'm always really busy and I make money from it, and I feel very privileged. I'm always asked if I would do prints, and I won't. Because I think that it cheapens the work that I do, and I think that it also cheapens the story that I'm giving. I don't want it to be a mass-produced item. I don't want it to go to China and be, in 17 different versions. Would you like a red one? Would you like a black one? Would you like a gold one? I think that our storytelling and our unique ability to tell these beautiful stories in paintings is what the market, but also what we want as humans, is a personalised connection. So I've always struggled with, as my prices got more expensive, I could furnish less and less of the market. I could talk to less humans about my work. I could talk to people, but I couldn't actually have a definitive and engaged conversation. So being able to give somebody a book at a much cheaper rate than a $10,000 or $20,000 painting is a way that I can connect and a way that I can engage in a really humble and unique way to tell the stories of my mob. So that was one of the main reasons. The other really big reason was because I wanted to take up some bloody shelf space, because I'm really sick of other people telling our stories. There are so many people, there are so many buildings that have our language on it that have never gone through the correct protocol or the right hands to actually have our language or our words on those walls. They just pick them out of a book and throw them up on a bloody wall, or pick the eyes out of stories that they find in Google. And for me, I wanted, as a Gadigal woman and a proud Aboriginal person, to tell our stories from our perspective. And the only way I could work out how to do that, because I'm not a writer, I'm a painter, was to torture myself in getting that writing right to go with the paintings that I had already made and I'd already been inspired to communicate.
So within the book, you've got lots and lots of paintings, and there's many different styles of paintings in there. And once I heard you refer to yourself as, I am an Aboriginal dot painter. And often when you hear someone say, I'm an Aboriginal dot painter, they imagine a very different place, a very different space, and a very different story. Can you talk to us a little bit about what that looks like and what that means, and how that interdigitates with the words that you've astutely put on the paper?
Look, I think it's I should back it up. So as part of my practice as an artist, I refer quite a lot to archival material. So as Gadigal people, and there are Uncle Ray and Uncle Charles are here today, as Gadigal people, we haven't been disconnected, but we've had a very interesting experience over the last 300 years. We were the first colonised mob. We were the point of ground zero for the colony. We lost language, we lost human life, we lost so many connections to our story, our culture, and our place. Our continuing connection is there. However, there's some nuances that have gone into the ether. And the reason that they've gone into the ether is by this huge big humdrum economic capitalist economy that is Sydney and 10 million people. So what I like to do is work out what I want to say as a general rule, and then I spend quite a lot of time researching. So I'm not an academic. Oh my God, Everett's standing. The baby is standing up the front. It's a moment. So I like to do a lot of academic research. I'm not an academic. I've got an architecture degree and an MBA, but I'm not an academic researcher. I've spent a lot of time in the archive, both the National Archive, but mainly in the State Library, as that's where a lot of the Sydney research is. From that Sydney research, I then start to pull out what I can find that is visually stimulating and stimulate something that I've already found before, and try and find aha moments that make sense based on things that I've already read or things that I've already seen. So to call myself a dot painter, I've been hammered for it before. I've also been celebrated for it. I talk about reimagining our traditions, dot paintings, which is very much seen as a central desert motive. And what I can confirm to you today is that I finally got access to the engravings that I have been trying to get access to for 2.5 years at the Mitchell Library, and I can confirm the Gadigal people were dot painters. So shove that in your pipe and smoke it. So we were actually dot painters. So there is one really beautiful cartographic document that only Gadigal and some Koori people are allowed to see. I have finally been allowed to see it and reproduce it for my own use. And it documents the engravings and paintings around the entirety of the Sydney Harbour, of which there are over 2,000 that are currently under buildings or have been destroyed. And most of them are either beautiful line artwork or dot paintings. The dot paintings are usually, from what I can work out, what I've been able to glean, are paintings of celestial movement. So they're really interesting, and that's definitely something that when I go over to the British Museum, I will be looking into.
Well, I was about to ask you about that actually, and that's really interesting because I have not heard such a fulsome explanation of that. So thank you so much for that. It's really cool. But yes, let's talk a little bit more about the British Museum, because I know that you've been overseas a lot. You've had some really amazing opportunities of being in residence around the world. But you received news. You inked an agreement very recently about a visit you're about to do to the BM. Would you be okay to share this with this audience?
Sure.
This is big.
So I've just signed a consultancy agreement with the British Museum as the first Gadigal person. I think I'm the first Aboriginal person to go and consult directly to the British Museum within the archive. So last year I was offered the opportunity to go and have a look at some of what I like to call the treasures, they call artefacts, down in the 5-story below bunker. And while I was there, beyond a visceral response, it was for me, because I have spent so much time academically researching our connections and our past and our culture and our custom, there were more aha moments in the 5 hours that I spent with the researchers there than I'd ever had. So, they were pulling things out. They pulled 5 things out for me to look at, and then the next minute I had like 3 researchers throwing open the archive and grabbing things and pulling them out and going, what's this? What's that? Where did that come from? What's that mark mean? Because I could see it. Because I've spent so much time seeing it, I knew that the paint up on that particular sphere was this big, it was that type of corroboree because I'd seen it and I had it documented. So it wasn't, it'd be like reading your favourite book 3 times and then somebody asks you what's on page 16. You go, oh, is that about when she snogs that guy? You just know. It's inherent. And I think that because I'm in it all the time, I forget how much I know. And they were obviously quite impressed by that. And then I went to them and said, I've got a bit of a challenge with the British Museum lending out artefacts and allowing them to be called things that aren't the appropriate names. And I had a really good conversation with the head of Oceania, who said, well, the best way that we can fix that is if you come over and rename them for us. And I said, I would be delighted to do that. While I'm there, do you think maybe I could unpick some of the things and learn how to recreate some of our treasures. So what started as sort of, I suppose, a small opportunity became a really big one. So I'm going to spend the next 2 years bouncing between here and London. And my wish is that I would go over, identify the artefacts that I want to work with, and then I work with the conservators to unpick those things and work out what they're created of, how they're created. Spend time in my studio as a boring nooner, as I do, 10 hours away in the bush on my own, working out how to make those things and then passing them through to my kin. So actually taking them back to the young people in our mob and teaching them how to weave the baskets, teaching them how to paint the shields, how to make the coolamons, whatever it is we choose. And then the final part would be that I've invited Uncle Ray and Uncle Charles to come back with me, in the hopes that in spending those couple of years with those treasures that they might repatriate those to us.
Yeah. Very few more worthy pursuits. Can I?
Yeah, I
think of,
kind of see it as the Tim Tam of biscuits there. Yeah, it feels like it's the worthiest of the things that I've done today. Yeah.
And one of the things that, I'm hearing out of this, and one of the things that I'm seeing out of this a lot, is your very deep sense of belonging. And I mean by that something different to how one connects to country, but it's how one moves through country, how one nurtures country. And Uncle, thank you very much for reminding us that country never forgets us. Country always remembers, no matter how long we've been here. And that's a real value to us. So going to London and doing this work is really in great service of love, isn't it?
Yeah, it's devotion. It's like the ultimate devotion to putting back together some of the puzzle pieces that have either, unconsciously been destroyed or very consciously been destroyed over the last 300 years. I talk often in mixed rooms with, mixed responses. I feel like this might be a friendly room though, about colonisation, and that, people that live in areas of high population, high economic and financial value often go through colonisation more than once. So colonisation happened once for us with the British and has happened more than once to us by our fellow brothers and sisters, but also by the machine that is life. So for us, we have lost a lot, and I don't think I would never speak on behalf of others, and nor do I, have an ego big enough to think that I can reclaim the lot. But I think that with devotion and a tireless vision of wanting to try and make it better, that I will at least be able to leave the world better than I found it, or leave the world for my children and for my kin better than I found it.
Yeah, it sounds pretty fair. Now, I know one of the joys out of coming together like this to have a yarn with someone who's doing something as important as this work is to hear from you and to see whether or not you've got any questions. So I have a microphone in my hand, and I'm just wondering if there's any burners on the top. Like, I've got 101 more questions in my head. We could be here until midnight, and I know that the Better Dead Than Red mob will want us out soon. So just to give the floor an opportunity, Is there anyone on the floor who would like to ask a question?
I suppose the leverage that you possibly have for the British Museum and I suppose bringing those treasures back. What's your planning? Because I imagine there's so many treasures over there that come from all different clans, all different nations across this continent. How are you planning to open up those channels to, I suppose, invite knowledge holders to collectively collect those things and bring them back?
Look, that's like a 5-part question. The first part is in Europe at the moment, Paris has been the first to sign the MOU, which is any body parts must be repatriated over the next 3 years. So there's a 36-month amnesty where if they're not repatriated, they'll end up getting really big fines. So when I was at the Quai Branly, which is the British Museum-esque place in Paris, they had like 450 Papua New Guinean heads as you walked in, which is quite disconcerting to have a bunch of skulls staring at you. That's not going to be allowed anymore in France. It looks very, very likely in all my chats with the British Museum that the Brits will also be repatriating any human remains. In terms of pathways, there isn't a pathway, and there's never been a pathway for repatriation. And my journey with the British Museum isn't necessarily for repatriation. It's first about research and understanding, and also being able to reclaim those skill sets. What I hope it does is, by putting up my hand and saying I'm happy to be the guinea pig in this practice, it allows the British Museum to feel a sense of security and safety amongst Aboriginal people, and allow more people to go over to learn things about where they've come from and identity. The fact that those things were originally stolen from this land and taken, 22,000 kilometres away over to London is kind of, obtuse in itself. But the fact of the matter is, having people that are traditional custodians or caretakers or knowledge holders from their mobs be able to go over and at least be able to see and understand those practices is something that will re-inform us back here. There's been some amazing examples with, the Inuit tribes, but also with Native Americans, like our brothers and sisters in other First Nations, with other First Nations people, where this sort of process is starting to open up. It's like, it's going to be a trial and error process. It's also why we've said that this piece of work, or this project that I'm going to work on with them, will have an artist outcome. So it will have, a set of paintings. We've also agreed that they will publish a book of me remaking these objects and retooling them, so that it's actually an educational process as well. So we're, while it sounds really banal, we're actually going back to the very beginning. Like, how did this get made? What did it get made of? How did it get made? Who made it? And then being able to translate those physical things back into community here, both with our Gadigal people, but also with the mobs all around us, to go, did anyone else make stuff like this?
So many keys, hey?
There's so many locks to unlock, and the first lock to unlock is being able to touch it, see it, smell it, and understand it is the first thing. And then the next thing is to socialise that practice, get other people able to make it, know how to do it. And then from there, hopefully it gives people confidence. Again, to Lisa's earlier point, like, why did I self-publish? Why did I mortgage my house to go and, spend lots of money so everyone can have a book and I make no money out of it? Well, it's also because if I don't socialise this viewpoint of mine with others, there's no collective that understands that these opportunities exist.
And plus, what's being held here in Australia, maybe BHP might have following inclination to release.
Correct.
That have already been stored.
Correct. So this is it's like a chain reaction. Nothing happens, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it, no one hears it. I'm trying to make people hear it. That's my point about taking up shelf space. I wanted people to see a bright yellow. Like, I chose the yellow and the black and white. I didn't choose the picture of my head. I'm just telling you that now. That still weirds me out a lot. But the yellow and the hardcover, it was really, really purposeful, because I really wanted to take up a lot of bookshelf space. I wanted people to see it and know. So that we are putting I say to my kids sometimes, you've got to just put your elbows out a bit. Like, stand up, put your elbows out. We need to put our elbows out a little bit more, I think. And post-referendum, it's the time to do that. We've finally got 40% of the audience want to back us. Before we had 3%. I see, while it was a loss for us, it's a win. I've now got 40% more allies that want to help me on this journey.
To begin with, wow, as a young Indigenous woman, hearing the things that you were doing for your people, but also for all of us as people of this country, literally, I'm going to cry. Like, wow.
Thanks.
But in doing this, in taking the initiative and using your resources and your ability and your passion to venture out into so many different mediums, to be heard and to be seen, I know from my experiences as a person that paints and represents who I am culturally, like it can take a lot out of your own spirit being the fight, like being in that fight and being in that journey. And you are doing like so much and expanding so beautifully. I was just wondering if there are any things that you do to keep yourself culturally safe and keep yourself centered to country and feeling nourished, because you're giving so much all the time.
Good question. Really good question. As a young Aboriginal woman, Jessie, trolls are going to troll. I have been trolled within an inch of my life this week. I have had everyone from, Southern Cross tattooed on their face to Woomban ute driving assholes call me every name under the sun using fake accounts on social media. I have also had, in inverted commas, women from where I live up on the Bundjalung country, be extraordinarily nasty and inhumane about me, my family, what I stand for. There is no right answer to that, and it's really, really difficult. Sometimes you feel absolutely ruined, like there's absolutely no point and that you shouldn't keep on. For me as a mum, I look at my kids and I just have to, there just isn't a no. Like, it doesn't matter how stuffed you are or how ruined you are or how heartbroken you are. You have to be motivated to make it better. I think that without that motivation to make it better and without that motivation to know that it can, and I think that's the big thing. We've glimpsed now, you and I in our lifetime, that it can be better. And now that we've glimpsed it, we've got to run at it. And there's a really good button on social media called delete and block and report. And there's also a really good button on your phone called airplane mode. And to be fair, my arts practice is my meditation. So, I paint anywhere up to 80 hours a week. And I'm in a deep meditation while I'm painting. I listen to podcasts, I listen to books, I listen to a lot of academic stuff, but I'm also in a lot of goddamn silence, and it's beautiful. I don't wear shoes. I never look like this. I never look like this. I'm always covered in paint. I don't wear shoes. I live on acreage. I live in the bush. So I have the best of both worlds in that I feel like in some ways I can dial in and dial out. And that's really purposeful. I've built my life in that way so that I can dial in and dial out. I don't think I could survive in Sydney anymore. I think that I've lived out of country now for almost 10 years, and I don't know whether the politics, both black and white, would probably kill me if I stayed here. I don't think that I could be a happy Aboriginal or a happy Gadigal artist and produce the work that I was producing if I lived here anymore. That said, I come home and just, excuse my language, shit lights up. I landed this morning and I'm got my little happy dance and I've got my makeup on and I feel invigorated. I feel alive. I know the stories of this place like the back of my hand. I know the language of this place, not like the back of my hand, but I'm getting there. And I feel a true connection. But you've got to find what works for you. You've got to find that sense of stillness and silence. And the greatest advice I've ever been given, and I get given it by the same person over and over and over again, is, and he's here tonight, he says to me, Katie, babe, just be graceful. Just don't reply. Just be graceful. And he goes, always says to me, don't ever stoop down to the level of others. You know what your job is and what your mission is, and just keep going. And that's Uncle Ray. He gives me so much strength when I have a little wobble. I go, oh, God. He goes, don't be ridiculous. Just be graceful. And I think that Gadigal people, reading between the lines and reading on the lines, we've always been a very graceful people. I think that's how we've survived. I think that's how we made it through, not just colonisation, but how we made it through, the 300 years after. We're still here. We're still taking up bookshelf space. We're still going over to museums in other countries and looking at, you know, artifacts, these beautiful treasures, and rekindling our love affair with our culture. So I think that's important. The passion, find the passion. If you're not passionate about what you're doing, you got to drop it.
I know there are a couple of other hands that were up here, but is there any other burners? Hello.
I've kind of got two questions.
Yeah.
I have to pick one. Oh no. Well, okay, I'm gonna go following on from that one then. Yeah, like I relate to what you're saying about it being hard to live in Sydney, probably for similar and also very different reasons. And I was just wondering if you have any like places, you know, that are like escape kind of places for you when you are in Sydney, or that whether you did in the past, because
everybody knows that I'm always the weirdo down at the botanical gardens that jumps over the wall into the water at low tide. So I can literally, I don't normally look like this, but I would be wearing nicer clothes than just leggings, and the tourists, usually heaps of Asian tourists, are down there taking photos of like because you can see the opera house and you can see the bridge, and you can just get in the water there. And people are like, what are you doing, you total random weirdo? I'm like, I'm looking for rocks and little clay deposits, and I just wade out to my knees and sometimes see the kayakers. I find that area just spectacularly beautiful. It's also the opportunity for me, if I'm walking around that beautiful foreshore, it's what they're those moments where you can sort of stand and almost look towards Fort Denison and over to the Camaragal like harbour side where it's really bushy, and go, this is what it would have looked like. You can block out all the noise behind you. You can sort of, you have that moment's sense of peace, and you go, wow, this is, you can almost get there. You can tune it out just quietly enough that you can go back to a time where Sydney was a really beautiful and peaceful harbour. And that for me is beautiful. I also love to go and take, you know, there's been some beautiful books written by Australian authors throughout time about Sydney, and one of which is my absolute favourite. It's a terrible audiobook because the guy's got such a twangy Londoner accent, but it's A Timeless Land by Eleanor Dark, which was published in 1940, and it's the very first book ever written from an Aboriginal perspective ever in fiction. And it is fucking magnificent. It's one of the most beautiful works. It's inaccurate in a lot of ways, but for the time and place, 1940, she had trawled. She spent 5 years trawling through the same archives that I trawl through, the same archives that Professor Jackie Troy, who helped to rebuild our Gadigal language, went through, and has, you know, more than 300 language words that are Gadigal language words in a book of fiction written by a woman in 1940 from a black perspective. Who knew? It's one of the most beautiful books, and I was gifted a first edition copy recently because I bang on about the book all the time, and I travel with it usually pretty much every time I come to Sydney, and I usually like to read it on the foreshore. And it gives me that gives me that sense of before.
I can certainly see you on that foreshore, you know.
I think you've seen me do it. Excuse me, I just need some ochre.
That's right, off she goes. But that's the thing, is that you can find that on country. You can find that wherever you are by having that view, that perspective, that sense of belonging, and that utter dedication to understand country and to know country. And what I love about what you're doing tonight with us, and what you've done in this book, and what I've witnessed you doing over some time now, is that you're asking us to reflect and to look in a mirror, and for us to take responsibility for how we are on this country that has always been this place of knowledge exchange and learning. Kate, thank you so very, very much for sharing your wisdom with us tonight. I'm very pleased to say that there are copies of the books here for you. I would recommend very strongly, no matter what, just get a copy of it, get 2 copies of it. This is a real privilege of a book. I've bought 10 copies of this book, just saying. But, you know, it's just something that is a really precious item that allows you to move into a world that is so rare for so many of us. So thank you very much, Constantina.
Thank you so much for having me.